Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Gym Goss. You are joined by myself, Jackson Peos, Samuel Schepis, as usual, and we are here today with Sophie Allen. Welcome, Soph.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. This is so many people on a podcast, so hopefully we don't talk over each other because this is new.
Yeah, we usually make it work, so don't worry about that. There's always a bit of talking over each other, even if we're in person. So the podcast is no exception anyway. So boys, welcome back again. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking to Soph, as well as sharing our own thoughts and opinions on all things online coaching. This one might get a little bit hairy and somewhat controversial. Jackson and I have spoken off air about some of our thoughts about the current landscape of online coaching, and we feel that this one might ruffle a few jimmies. So firstly, before we get into all of the good stuff, we'll get a little bit of an insight into Sophie's background. So Soph, tell us how you got into coaching and what led you down the path that you've been on to be where you are now, which is, I dare say, up there with some of the biggest online coaches in Australia.
Oh, that's a big compliment. Thank you. I actually have a really random background. I have my bachelor's degree in architecture and I've got a postgraduate certificate in marketing. So I've sort of worked in that area for a while. And then I was getting into my own fitness training journey and was super passionate about it. That was what I was spending my spare time doing, reading up articles. I think it was T Nation and stuff, back bodybuilding.com, all those great websites. And then I was like, okay, I think I should probably get qualified because on the side, I was also building my social media presence on Instagram, and that was growing. And I had a lot of people asking questions and didn't really feel comfortable answering them without having, formal qualifications. So I got certified, and alongside sort of working full time and getting certified online and my social media following growing and my own experience with some pretty reputable coaches in Sydney, I decided to take the leap into coaching myself. So I just went straight to online. I never did any one-on-one stuff. And I started out doing one-on-one coaching with spreadsheets, Excel spreadsheets. And then there were, having a big following at that point. I think I had 80,000 on Instagram back then. And there was a lot of people that wanted to be coached. And obviously I was one person, so I couldn't exactly cater to them all. So I came out with some ebooks, and then the money that I made from that went towards building an app, which was through a third party company. And that's where I'm currently at. And then there's something else that I'm getting very close to launching that I won't, maybe I will speak about it in this, who knows. I haven't officially said anything about it online, but you guys know what it is. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Awesome. And I guess during this process of online coaching, did you coach in person at all, or were you purely online?
No, when I'd train with friends and stuff, I would do a little bit of, correcting their technique, but it was never, formal one-on-one sessions, which I'm sure there'll be some comments about that in this, which I'll take. But yeah, no, it was always online.
Yep. And Jackson, your story is kind of similar, except obviously coming from a background in undergraduate studies and then postgraduate in the fitness field, basically, and then going into online, correct?
Yeah, so I basically had the intention of either being a professor in nutrition and educating the young bucks coming up wanting to learn, or to work as basically a high performance manager in pro sport. So managing the training and the nutrition side of things, like NFL, NBA, things like that. That was my initial plan when coming up through tertiary education. And then sort of in that early period of PhD in clinical and sports nutrition, that's when I started doing some private work on the side, nutritional management for private clients, and not through anything specific. It's not like I was trying to market myself in that, but that side of things just grew quite quickly, naturally through word of mouth and whatnot. And I just sort of got to a point where I was like, well, geez, this is a flourishing business at this point. Let's just run with it for the time being. And those options to go down the professor route and to work in pro sport are still going to be there later on. But let's just see where I can take this for now.
I guess I can speak for Sam and myself here. That's kind of how things unfolded for us as well, but mostly in-person coaching, working with clients face-to-face. It just grew organically and was something that was the logical and very much, natural step forward in our careers. So was there ever a time where, Soph, you felt as though things were getting a little bit out of control with the growth of your online business, and how did you manage that?
Yeah, there were definitely, having a big following definitely means there was high demand, and being, just myself. So I had to get to the point where I started hiring people, and that was like a whole new experience because I'd never really considered that I would grow a business from that respect. It was sort of like, you're really passionate about training people and coaching people, but then there's all these other elements that you have to consider about running a business and doing it, properly and doing it the most financially viable way. So these were things that I'd never learnt and had to sort of just pick up and hope that I had good people around me to give me advice. So it was mostly like customer service side that was really difficult and was just all consuming. Like, it was consuming so much of my time where I was just doing that, let alone trying to, create content and continue to grow the business in the way that I wanted to, or even think about the way that I wanted to grow it. It was just like survival mode. And that was when I made my first hire for someone to help me with customer service. And I've got 2 people who take care of that now, which is like a godsend. Like, it was, incredibly helpful. But that's been not the hardest part, but that was one of the moments where I was like, wow, this is really difficult to do it all.
Yeah. And I can see why. So I guess something that Samuel and I see quite a lot of, because we work with coaches in person, many of them coaches themselves, as well as mentor a number of our mentorship students who are wanting to be online coaches. There's a big difference between online coaching happening for you versus trying to make it happen for you. And from what I can gather in all of our situations, coaching sort of happened for us. It just, grew organically through word of mouth and got to the point where it's quite a lucrative and sustainable career. Samuel, talk to us about what you see to be some of the differences in how coaches starting out their career who want to make a career out of online coaching go about things versus, I guess, what we've done as it's all unfolded. And if there's any, I guess, words of advice that you'd give those coaches who are trying to make it happen if it's not already happening for them.
I think that for all coaches, whether you work online or in person, and I guess how you get there, I think there's an element of kind of like paying your dues, and there is a degree of experience that is required. Like, whether, Soph and Jackson, both, online businesses grew quite rapidly by the sounds of it. And it's like, they're paying their dues was, as a product of time in their own training with other people, building a brand and a business that allowed for the online coaching to grow. For us, paying our dues was, I guess, just coaching people, just doing that in person, right? I think a lot of new coaches they see, these experienced coaches who have been doing it for a long time, online, in person, whatever it might be, and think, oh yeah, this is great. This is a lifestyle. And I'm just going to start there and, bypass a lot of the groundwork that it takes to build a client base, to build a reputation. Like, people don't just go and train with Soph because she has followers. They train with her because she's obviously demonstrated results with herself and other people, and has done that over time. And it's like, that's, she's marketed herself well. Same with Jackson, both market well, both live and die by the sword, I guess, so to speak. There's not a lot of coaches that I see personally out there who don't kind of bleed that blood. They're there training, they're working on, bettering themselves and kind of setting a good example. I think that's what people really buy into. It's not just, oh, I'm just going to be an online coach and everyone should train with me. I think a lot of people have a personal experience, and then that professional and that working experience with clients and working with other people is developed over time. And that's how you really become a successful coach, irrespective of whether it is in person or online. There's a time period that is necessary, and like experience both personally and working with other people. And it sounds like everyone on the call here has that.
Yeah. So I think Jackson will want to definitely speak to this point. As we all know, the qualifications are simply not enough to get into the online coaching game, right? At the end of the day, online coaching is now quite a highly saturated industry or area of the fitness industry, and it's also very easy to become qualified and poorly regulated. There's not a lot that you need. Basically, the criteria for being a successful coach these days is your social media platform, right? And how many followers you have. That's essentially the criteria that many people are selecting for. Samuel, I'll let you
before Jackson goes ham on that one. I think the fitness industry at large is like rife with a lack of regulation. As I spoke to Danny Lennon about this a few years ago. I just think, it's like my formal education was in law, and you see that a lot of these, and this is like one of the reasons that personal trainers and coaches often have a bad reputation, is because it isn't regulated. Like you go look at accountants, lawyers, doctors, they're so highly regulated industries that anywhere you go in order to be that profession, there's so many boxes that you have to tick along the way, 5-6 years of university, then you got to go and do, years of placements, or, like or just so many boxes to tick along the way that it just weeds out a lot of the people who might not be cut out for it. And, there's a degree of consumer certainty and accountability from the professionals, whereas in the fitness industry, we just don't have that. Even the regulatory bodies are completely
unregulated.
It's like you pay, they'll rename nameless some of the Australian fitness bodies. They don't regulate shit. All they do is send an email out saying you need to do some CECs or like continuing education. It's like there's no regulation whatsoever. So of course it's easy to become a coach and to think that it's easy. And then, people do have really poor experiences with coaches, and it creates a bad reputation. I could talk about that for fucking hours, but yeah, the fitness industry needs some reform in that respect. Jackson.
Yeah, so there's probably two main things that are fucking me off most with online coaching at the moment. And the first one is that we've got this wave of people wanting to get into online coaching for no other real reason than it seems like a lucrative business opportunity. And it's like, when we got into this, we got into it because we wanted to help people and make a positive influence on people's lives. And now we've got people getting into online coaching like it's fucking Herbalife. Like they're trying to get into this pyramid scheme type thing to make some dollars. And this is a problem. And it's like, I'm getting messages all the fucking time on Instagram. Like, I'm looking to get into online coaching. Can you give me some advice and things like that? And you sort of pick apart a little bit, and like they want to do it because they want to be living in Bali and making a good amount of money for the work spent. And that's just like, that bothers me a lot. And the second thing is
Jackson,
that,
just before you get into the second point there, what do you think is the attraction to online coaching? So obviously there's the flexibility in working schedule, right? So being able to work anywhere you want. There's the financial side. Surely there's got to be some element of, I like fitness, I like helping people, I like training myself. What else do you think is attracting people to online coaching?
The fact that there's no barriers to entry, like for the amount that we charge, right? People might say, like, that's a lot of money for what you have to do per like the minute spent on the check-in each week or something like that. But that's not what we're charging for. We're charging for the fucking years of education that happened before that, and the investing and the paying the dues that we talked about before.
There's an analogy, sorry, Jackson, there's a really good analogy I like that explains that. And I often tell my clients when I'm with them in person, and, you know, I might fix their squat in like less than a session. And they'll be like, well, you know, you only did one thing. Like, why do I pay so much? I'm like, well, there's a really useful like parable or story about an engineer who fixes a ship. And there's this broken down ship, and it's very expensive. The owners had spent millions of dollars on it, and they had some engineering issue, and they got all the best engineers in the world to try and come and fix it. No one could come and fix it. And then this old guy comes with his little toolbox, and they say, mate, you surely can't fix it. And he says, well, what's the highest quote you've been charged? And they told him, and he said, well, if I fix it, that's what I want you to pay me. And they agreed, laughed and said, you can't pay it. Anyway, he looks at the problem and he fixed it within an hour. And they said, well, we got this quote, but that was based on weeks and months of work. So you only took an hour. And he said, yeah, but you're not paying me for the hour's work. You're paying me to be able to find the problem with it and fix it so quickly. And that took me my whole life to be able to learn. And that's essentially what you're saying there, right?
Yeah. And it's like, but now we've got these people coming in that don't really want to pay the dues, because the fact is that they can draw client signups with not much else than looking good and having a six pack or an ass or something like that. And they're like, fuck it, what do we need to pay the dues for? And what do we need to spend the years educating for, and the dollars spent on certifications, qualifications, mentorships, things like that? They can just jump right in, charge similar amounts, and think that everything's fine. And like, I can understand how lucrative that could be, but it's like, for people like us who are very passionate about the fitness industry, passionate about coaching, it's like, we don't want the sea of online coaching to be made up of people like that are in it to be able to make some dollars with not having to do much in their mind. Like that, if that's the motivation for people getting into online coaching, that really fucking pisses me off. And I do get the sense that just over the last sort of 12 months, maybe 24 months, that has been a driver for a lot of people wanting to get into the game. And another part that really bothers me is what we touched on before, is like these lack of barriers of entry to get into the game. It's like, if we think about like a lawyer, and let's say someone wants to work as a lawyer, and they go down to a law firm one day, and they're like, hey, I want to work at your law firm. And the people are like, fuck, great. How'd you do at the bar? And they're like, oh, I didn't do the bar. But I'm pretty passionate about law. I've watched Suits, and I think I've got a pretty good idea. They tell you to get fucked like right away. It's like, that's a big hard barrier that is proof that you've paid your dues, spent time educating and things like that. And we just don't have that in coaching. And that's why we've got so many people coming in. And people might say like, oh, like, what's the damage? Like, what's the harm in those people coming into the field? And it's like, every shitty coach, and they might not be doing direct harm, but for every client that they have, you're doing a disservice to them, because that person could be getting a better service elsewhere from someone who is better educated, with better experience, and things like that. But like, just from looking at the outside and watching how the online coaching scene has transformed recently, it just makes it feel like it's a big fad to me now, for many people. And for people who have paid their dues and been in it early, will be okay. But there's going to be a lot of people that get burnt by this, I think, because unfortunately, still at this moment, the biggest driver for client signups is the client wanting to look like the coach. That's the reality. And I know this because even when I'm going through an off season and carrying a little bit higher fat than usual, or having an injury and not posting sort of physique content, my client sort of requests and things, they go way down. And it's like, that's someone who's spent years and years and years educating. And I dare say, in terms of the CV, I'd probably have one of the highest ones in most people. But it's like, still, like, people are deciding whether they want to work with me based on how I look. And that's a big shame. And it just makes me think that for all these coaches that are getting into it and they're not really paying their dues and they don't really have any certifications or credentials behind them, it's like, what's going to happen when your physique starts deteriorating? And it's like, are you still going to get those client signups? Probably not. So I think there is a massive temporality on online coaching for a lot of people. And I think we might be in a bit of a bubble, and a bubble similar to maybe like the gym clothing scene in Australia or worldwide. Let's say worldwide. It's like, if you remember, like there was like Gymshark and maybe a couple that first got in early, and they like, everyone was like, fuck yeah. And then as the years went by, every man and his dog started doing gym clothing, like singlets, stringers, things like that. And all of a sudden there was just everywhere you would see these new gym clothing companies starting up. And then basically it was a bubble. It got to a point where it was like there was too many different options, and those options weren't able to sustain enough revenue, and then they died out. And the guys that were in early, like the Gymsharks and things like that, they were able to ride the storm all the way through. But for a lot of those people that just wanted to jump on the bandwagon to make a quick dollar, it's like they're nowhere to be seen anymore. And I just have a feeling that there's going to be a similar thing with online coaching over the next few years, where people jumping in now is like, they're just not going to be there anymore.
I think there's two sort of consequences to this wave of online coaching. We'll discuss the first because I think that relates more to your point, Jackson. So the first one is the selection criteria of coaches, or client selection criteria. And there's actually research on this that I've looked at, and they've identified themes basically in what people are looking at when they're hiring a coach. And the four criteria are the physical appearance of the coach, their gender, empathy, and the results of others. So they're the four criteria that people are selecting for when they're looking at a coach, with physical appearance being the largest. Now, I think that has a number of issues for coaches because it puts a lot of pressure on them to look a certain way. And it creates this snowball effect, as you were talking about, Jackson, of, okay, this like causal factor in my financial success is how I look. Therefore, I need to look like this all the time. And it creates this unrealistic expectation for the clients, right? And then they've got to deal with a whole set of problems when they're working with these clients who expect to look like that year round as well. So that's one problem. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, Soph, because I know you and I have discussed this at length, and that was the primary reason we started working together, was for you to sort of be able to extract yourself from that, pressure, and to be able to navigate social media a little bit more effectively as an online coach, and deal with some of, I guess, the drawbacks of trying to look the way that your followers and your clients expected you to look year round. So do you want to talk to that a bit, Soph?
Yeah, I really relate to what Jackson was saying about if you go through like a bulking phase or you're injured or something and your physique looks, it's not shredded, then you have like less of a sign up happening. And I definitely went through a phase where I got an injury. I was on some thyroid medication or some skin medication that affected my thyroid. It was sort of like a perfect storm, and then COVID and everything. And reasons aside, I gained a bunch of weight, and it was a really uncomfortable time for me to be posting on social media because I felt like people expected me to look a certain way and I didn't. And I was really worried about how that was going to affect my business. It was really difficult to show up, and that whole, like, when you're your brand, your personal brand, it can put a lot of pressure on looking a certain way, and then it sort of takes the joy away from training, which I think so many of us, we're so passionate about what we do because we love it, but then when it becomes work, training can actually become a chore, and that's really like not a fun place to be. So we were really focusing on removing myself from my brand and trying to separate the two as best we could, and working on the mental side of that and just trying to get to a good place with it all. And it's funny, I went through that whole thing, and now, you know, I'm leaner now, and it's going better now. And it's frustrating because you try to sort of break that narrative, but it's just a continuous cycle. But there's people who have been with you throughout your whole journey and really appreciate the realness and showing every element of it. And I think that leads into the empathy card that you were saying is why a lot of people sign up. I think people join because they appreciate you sharing the realities of what it is to go through different experiences with dieting, with restriction, with building, with, you know, bulking, whatever it might be. So I think people also want a coach who understands all the different elements of going through that. Because I think when you have a coach who, quote unquote, perfectly hits their calories and hits their macros and doesn't miss a session and doesn't miss a lift, or at least shows that perception online, it can be really difficult to relate to them. And some people might love that and go for that, but obviously we have a lot of diversity in what people are looking for in a coach. But I think what seems to be like trending now across social platforms is realness. Like that's what people want to see, and that's what people are responding to. And I think, yeah, whilst that experience was really difficult and I don't want to go through it again, it was, you know, you learn something from every experience. But I think to, you know, all of your points about a lot of people jumping on board coaching and the bandwagon and stuff, it's like social media makes everything look like it happens overnight. So people see these businesses blowing up, or this influencer blowing up because they have an amazing physique or whatever it might be. And then they've got this business and their business is going nuts. So people look at that and think, oh, that's what I want to do. Being a content creator is now a job. It wasn't a job when we all got into what we were doing. It was sort of just ticking away, which is why for a lot of us, our businesses happened organically. Whereas now people can be so much more strategic about it and be like, I'm going to grow a social media following, and then I'm going to do an app, and then that's going to be my business. Whereas that's just not how we went about it. So there's a change that's going on in the industry. And, you know, I agree, there's going to be a lot of people getting into it for the wrong reasons. And that's going to be really harmful to a lot of people unless they go about it in a way where they're hiring the people who've done the time to like program. So they actually have legitimate programs out there that are, you know, programs for both training and nutrition that are actually helping people. But I know a lot of people don't do that. And
a lot of coaches actually do the opposite. When they get so busy, they get their admin or whoever it is responsible for, you know, picking up the slack and doing all the tedious work for them to actually write the programs that people are buying off them. And I remember a pretty big online coach was caught out for this. He had his assistant writing the programs that people purchased from him. So they would buy one-on-one coaching from him, and he would get her to write the programs. And then she came out, leaked all of that. He got sued, and I haven't heard a word of him since that point. So yeah, I think you're absolutely spot on there. So it's a very treacherous path if you don't go about things the right way, because you will eventually get stuck in a point where either it's not working and you just don't know your ass from your head, and you don't know how to grow the business or even coach, or you're going to have so many clients that you don't know what to do with them because you haven't thought about it yet. So in terms of doing harm, Jackson, let's talk about this. What do you see to be the major harm that coaches who are unqualified or under-experienced, so say they're qualified, but under-experienced and don't have the requisite knowledge, education, or they haven't learned what they need to learn to be able to coach effectively? What's the harm that they're doing to their clients?
There's going to be a scale. So the fact is that there are a lot of coaches out there working now that don't really know that much more than how to increase the size of the calorie deficit by either decreasing food or increasing cardio. Like that's all the tools in their tool belt right now. And for clients working with those guys, it's going to be pretty hard to like quantify that harm done, right? It's like they're not hurting them per se, but are they going to get the best return on their investment? Are they going to get the best results? Absolutely not. Like, they would be far better off going off with someone at JPS or something like that. Now, that's one part of it. And you might say, well, who the fuck cares? Like, if they still drop a few kilos of body fat and like they're happy, they feel relatively happy, then it's all fine. And I can see where that's coming from. But the scale can also progress. And like, I've seen many girls specifically, they go to a coach, and because that coach only has 2 tools in his tool belt, and they're in fat loss phases, and as I mentioned, all they really know how to do is every time a weight loss plateau is reached, the deficit is increased, and the coach really has no idea how big that adjustment should be or the appropriate timing to make that adjustment. And then you get these clients ending their fat loss phase on extremely low amounts of food, suppressed metabolisms, high diet fatigue, a myriad of negative side effects associated with that. And they finish the 12-week program, and the coach says, congratulations, posts up their transformations and before and after, looks great, gets a bunch of likes on Instagram. And then the girl goes away, or the boy goes away, and they put that weight back on in 3-4 weeks, potentially arriving at a higher body fat than when they started working with the coach, with a suppressed metabolism, because that weight gain hasn't happened in line with metabolic restoration. And so now they're 4 weeks after working with the coach, they're just as fat as when they started the program, and now they've pulled 500 calories off their BMR, and now looking to go. Now, basically, the problem here is that it reinforces the belief that coaches are very important. And so it's like, oh, geez, when I was left to my own devices, shit hit the fan. So I need to go back with this coach, and we need to do another 12-week program and fix me back up. And that is a vicious cycle. And that rarely happens with.
There's 2 things going on there. That's like false attribution, right? So falsely attributing the success that you had to the diet. And then there's also what's called survivorship bias, in that because the diet worked and got the transformation, the coach will continue to be deemed successful because they're getting those transformation photos despite the consequences after the diet, right?
Yeah. So like, I justify that as major harm, because that can literally ruin people's lives, and it's not easy to repair that sometimes. And I do get a lot of clients that have come from bad previous coaching experiences, and trying to heal that wound is not fixed in a 10-week coaching block or something like that. And the process that is required to fix that is very, very long. The client often doesn't want to buy into it because it requires an extended period of time, pushing food and body fat much higher than it's ever been before, just to get yourself back to a point where you have a reasonable metabolic capacity to then start again and bring that body fat back down into a healthy place, and then teach the client the skills to be able to transition out of it safely and healthily. So that's sort of one of the major harms that I see often, is like the offerings of these 10, 12, 15-week programs where there's no real, because the client basically doesn't, the coach basically doesn't have the skills, the tools, or the education. It's all they really know is how to reduce body fat via deficit. It's like, it's once the program's over, it's see you later. I'll see you in a few months when that body fat's come back on and you're ready for another program.
Yeah, I have something to add to that. In terms of the skill and experience, I think a huge part of becoming an effective coach, especially online, is life experience and just maturity from getting older, learning a little bit more about life and having different experiences at different time points of your life. And a huge issue with the big wave of online coaches is that they're all young. They're all under 25 who have, for the last couple of years anyway, lived at home during COVID with their parents. They likely haven't worked before. They likely don't have a partner or a serious long-term relationship with kids. They haven't experienced many life stresses or anything like that. So they don't have a lot of experience that they can draw on to understand what their clients are going through in many cases. And I think because we've organically gone through that process of becoming online coaches as we've gotten older, we've got a little bit more life experience and personal experience to draw on. And I see a lot of young coaches now, telling their clients who are, middle-aged men or women who, work 9 to 5, have kids and busy, social lives, to track their calories, macros, and just work harder kind of thing. But this young kid doesn't understand that you can't really just work harder. You don't have the same 24 hours in a day. You all have 24 hours, but like, you can't use them the same when you've got kids and, responsibilities. And I see that to be a huge issue as well, is that a lot of the online coaching demographic now is made up of younger kids who don't have that life experience. And yeah, we can talk about that all day. But Soph, you and I sort of work together in a similar nature to how Jackson was explaining before. After that diet process, like, it's uncomfortable. You've got to have some skills up your sleeve and a bit of knowledge and experience to be able to work with someone through that process. Talk to us about how that experience has transformed, or at least shaped, how you go about things now, because I've seen in your practice, like, some big improvements. Not that you ever did anything like what we're talking about, but I've seen that additional experience has shaped how you coach now in a big way. And you're much more in tune with that now, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, for sure. So just some background, what Jackson was talking about basically happened to me. Constantly restricting, constantly going from deficit to deficit, rebounding, thinking, oh, I'm a coach. Like, how can this be happening to me? Like, I just need to try harder. Just living in deficits and never spending periods at a structured maintenance. So it would be like, I was either in a deficit restricting, or I wasn't. And when I wasn't, it wasn't planned, it wasn't structured, it wasn't tracking. It was just like, oh, I'm just not tracking. I'm just sick of dieting. There was so much diet fatigue. And this went on for like 5 years. And this damaged my relationship with food, with my body. There was the added pressure, like we said at the start, of showing up on social media, gaining weight over a period of time quite rapidly, and just being incredibly uncomfortable. And then that's when I started coaching with Jacob, and exactly what Jackson said, you don't want to hear, okay, cool, we're going to sit at maintenance and there's not really an end date to this. It's just, you have to look at things in bigger chunks of time, like years versus
I think we had
months.
nearly every week, Soph would come back to me and ask, so can we diet now?
When are you dropping calories?
And I was like, if she asked this week, I'm going to.
But I also knew, like, my body was like, no, like, this isn't right. Like, the fact that I still had food attachments and weird experiences and thoughts, feelings of guilt, I was like, no. And I couldn't jump on the scale because I was so scared of what I would see, because there was so much shame and guilt. And it's not just, like Jackson was saying, it's not just like, oh, cool, you lose weight and then you're good. The psychological damage is not an easy fix. It's not like, okay, even if you go through this process of regaining the weight and then losing it, you're fixed. It's like, no, you're going to have food, like relationship with food issues. There's going to be shame. There's going to be guilt. You're going to be obsessed with tracking everything. Like, there's so much psychologically that we probably don't even understand that goes on. And like, whilst I've come through that process and have lost, 8-9 kilos and maintain this for a period of a year, since sort of starting with Jacob, I still have moments like that. Like, I know that there are still things from years of doing that have just messed up my relationship with food. And so it's a constant work in progress. But to answer your question, how this has shaped what I do with coaching and how I've changed things, I really just push maintenance phases so much more. Like, deficits are something that we jump into and we just quickly kind of smash it out. and there's a criteria that you have to go through before jumping into it. And you also have to look at their history. Like if you've been chronically dieting and you just want to lose weight, but you haven't been able to, like, no, we're going to go to maintenance. Like we're just going to sit here for freaking ages until you're at a good place and you're able to sort of do that. You're just going to focus on your training and really focus on dialing in the habits of tracking. And a lot of people come to me and they've got like binge eating history and they've just been restricting and they're like, oh, it hasn't been working. And it's like, okay, all these signs point to needing to just give your body food for an extended period of time. I think people are just so reactive with their dieting that it's really about changing the mindset and the approach. So yeah, just really pushing maintenance phases, also really encouraging women to go into a surplus. And I think a lot of people come to you with this image in their head of what they want their body to look like. And they think deficit is the first thing you should do, but it's like a surplus would be so beneficial to so many women. I'm saying women because I only coach women. But yeah, they're sort of the main things that I've really been pushing.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, that's a sign of someone who's a good coach. They will recognize what the client needs and balance that with what they want and explain to them how their wants and needs might be contradicting one another at the moment, and ensure that whatever they give the client, whether it's what they want or what they need, doesn't harm them. And they will only give them what they want in situations where they're confident that it won't harm them. Samuel, you had something to say there, and then Jackson will get to you.
I just think, like, basically what Soph was summarizing is, as coaches gather more and more experience and you do work with more and more people, which is really a product of paying your dues, I guess, you do become better at, I guess, picking up on red flags. And the tools that, Jackson was talking about before, it's like your toolbox becomes far more diverse and your capacity to actually help people is not restricted to, okay, well, we're going to cut calories, and if that doesn't work, well, we'll just cut them again. It's like in the time that I've coached, doing a lot of like powerlifting, it's like we run, say, all sorts of, programs and stuff like that. And you do see people who are kind of like, they're looking for that quick fix. They're using a sport or a competition, or like, they got to make weight for a powerlifting or a weightlifting meet. And that's the only way that they know how to control their body weight. Otherwise, weight gain is inevitable and it's uncontrollable, and they can't do anything about it. So I think it's kind of this like band-aid fix. And, the coaches who don't have that, the underlying knowledge or the experience are incapable of giving the client what they need and what is actually in their best interest. And instead you have this kind of, negative cycle that Sophie was talking about, where they diet, they rebound, it doesn't work. So the solution is go back and diet again. And I think, yeah, working with more and more people and, different people, diverse people, like, that's probably the number one, aside from a baseline level of knowledge, that would be probably the number one most important thing in my mind for like long-term success as a coach, because ultimately it just means you can help more and more people with more like diverse life circumstances, diverse problems, and, do it in a way that's not going to, cause harm or fuck them up. And, hopefully you can leave a positive mark instead of one that, leaves them wondering what happened, what went wrong, and trying to search for the magic bullet for the rest of their life.
I totally agree. Jackson, what did you have to add to that?
So I think the most common sources of harm derived from unqualified coaches offering their services is metabolic damage, damage to psychology and or relationships with food, and thirdly, the sharing of misinformation about the process that basically confuses the industry and or the people within the fitness industry and holds us back from sort of progressing our knowledge there. But there's a couple of other things that I wanted to touch on, not as common, but specific cases of harm that are very damaging. So I'll give you a very close example to me, like it just happened this weekend. So I was coaching a professional bodybuilder that was competing on Saturday. It was prepping him for a reasonable chunk of time, and we got to the point of 3 weeks out, in great shape, on track. And he is also an online coach, qualifications unknown, and sent me his peak week plan. So with the competition on Saturday, water shut off Friday morning. It was about 3 burgers and fries that were distributed across 2 days out before the show. Pretty wacky things going on with sodium as well. Basically a mess. And I looked through it and I said, this is a terrible idea. This is not going to work. And this is not how I'm going to do it. And he basically said, okay, well, and I went through and I explained all what was wrong with this and why it was not going to work. And he basically said, well, okay, I'm going to do my own thing. And I was like, okay, fair enough. He competed on Saturday, basically as spilled over as you could ever get. All his lines from 2 to 3 weeks out were gone. Basically just looked like a puffed out mess, and was in the last call out. And it's like, that's harm. It's like he's done it to himself, but it's a product of unqualified coaching providing advice. Now the advice was taken by himself, but the same deal. And it's like, this guy's spent thousands of dollars preparing for his show, like in all the hard work, the mental drain, the physiological strain, plus like flying to another country to compete and things like that. It's like, you potentially just wasted all of that through improper advice. So that's one example of how unqualified coaches can do damage. And going into another category, even beyond that, is we've got people dying at like contests in the days before show, in peak week, show day, through wacky peak week practices mostly. And I dare say that if these coaches who were providing the advice had taken the time to at least do some basic fucking education surrounding human physiology, this would not be happening. Because I look at these protocols that are happening that are leading to these deaths, and it's obvious how much fucking wrong it is. It just does not make sense. And it's like, you know that something bad's going to happen, or that you're like running on the line of something bad happening. And it just makes me feel as if we did have some sort of barrier to entry, some way of proving that, okay, you've got some basics of education before you're providing advice that has a potential to leave people in comas, that we'd be able to avoid a lot of these issues. So, like I was touching on at the start when I was talking about, like, there's a scale of harm from like very moderate, but like the end of the scale is people are fucking dying from unqualified coaching advice. So it's like, take from that what you will, but like what we're discussing here is not just like fluffy bullshit. It's like, it's serious damage that is going on here.
And a lot of the time, the damage that happens is, as you said, Jackson, on the lesser end of that scale, but that can compound over time, right? It doesn't feel like it's a huge deal when you've got a little bit of food focus at the end of the diet. You're like, oh, I'm just hungry. But in many cases, when it leads to, disordered eating, which is, not the same as an eating disorder, such as binge eating, and then it, gets worse over time, that can have a huge strain on somebody's, psychology, their ability to just, regulate emotion and be a happy, well-functioning individual. And that can come at the cost of relationships, your career. Like, it doesn't seem like a big deal until it is. And usually a lot of the issues that unqualified and, online coaches who are engaging in malpractice, what they can cause is that, benign sort of, issue that you experience at the end of the diet. But as benign as it might be, it can develop into something quite, malignant and damaging over time. And you really don't know that until it happens. But I think, Samuel, you want to add to that?
I think people, particularly coaches, it's easy to be like, to potentially not appreciate the significance of the role that we play in people's lives. So many times, you end up playing the counselor, nutritionist, physical therapist, all these different roles, right? Because it's like maybe the availability, the affordability, the general knowledge that, comes with the territory, even though it is general knowledge. It's like, we're not qualified physiotherapists, we're not qualified doctors, but how many times, Jackson, have you been asked for medical advice, right? It's like, we all know that it happens, and it's very easy to step out of your zone. And I think that is one of the issues with online coaching, is there's a lack of accountability and an underappreciation for, where your lane ends and where someone else's lane starts. And if you give maybe bad advice, it's not really in your wheelhouse. That can have very serious repercussions physically, psychologically, emotionally. And, we see it all the time, like exactly what Jackson was just talking about. There are actually people dying, people get injured, when they follow, poor training programs. Like, we even see coaches who you would say, oh, they're a decent coach, following dumb advice from like coaches who are reputable. I just think that if people appreciate just how serious, an influence we can have on a particular individual's life, if they take what you say as fucking gospel and you give them bad advice and they go and action it out for weeks and months and years, that can, like, as you said, Jacob, compounding effect, that can be a very, very large impact, and a negative one, if you're not giving the right information, if you do not know, if you're, maybe not referring out when you should, and, people are listening to what you say. It can be very dangerous. And I think that more coaches should appreciate, you don't need to know everything. Having a network of people that you can go to for more information that you just don't know, just don't have, is going to be the best way to get, or at least avoid hurting people.
And I think Soph will attest to, at least how I go about things. I tried to, get her out of a deficit, obviously, and advise her not to, pursue another diet. And that I could have potentially lost Soph at that point. And I knew that, right? And that's the scary part for online coaches, is that if you say no, or you do what you think you should do, you might lose the client. And then,
I lost mine.
Yeah, right. And you've obviously had, a couple of injuries as well, Soph, but I didn't pretend that I knew how to fix them either. I referred you to a physiotherapist and worked in conjunction with them. And that's hard because it's scary. You might lose a client, but you should always be acting in the best interest of the client, not your back pocket. And I think that is critical for online coaches who want to succeed, to know you have to play the long game. You're going to have to say things to clients that they don't want to hear, and they might walk away. You might lose them. But at the end of the day, that short-term loss will allow you to succeed long-term. I guarantee it. Life is a game of games, and that's just basic game theory. It's not a zero-sum game. You can't just worry about, getting ahead in the short term, because you will lose in the long run. So I think that's
advice that a lot of people need to hear.
Yeah, it's really important to remember that. And I think the more coaches who know that, that will at least serve as a foundation to guide them away from malpractice and, doing, dubious things that are just trying to get that short-term transformation or to make that money off that client. None of the coaches I know who are still in the game, years and years, decades later, have just chased a dollar or, pushed clients, at least, once they realized how to coach properly, into doing things that weren't in the client's best interest. That's critical. So guys, what do you think is the solution to all of this? Jackson, do you want to start? Because we've had a bit of a chat about it on Instagram the other day. What's your proposed solution?
Yeah. So I think, like, one of the big problems with coaching is we have no like union or body or something that like we can go to when like shit goes wrong. And like we hear about like things like coaches overstepping the line with like making sexual innuendos, and like we hear about all these things going on with coaches in the dark, and it's like who do you go to when stuff like that happens? It's like the police. Like police aren't going to give a shit about that. And there's no one that's really like verifying coaches working in the field. It's like anyone can go in with any level of experience, any level of education. It's like just jump right in, like start posting on Instagram and give them a PayPal link and there you go. And it's like, that is a problem. Now, it would be great if there was some sort of body union, something that could be created to help provide some regulation. Now, the reason that it's not existing presently, I think, is just because that sort of shit costs money. It's like, who's going to pay for it? And me and Jacob sort of tossed around the idea of having like an industry funded body, like funded by people like us. And basically what it would be, or what our idea was, is to have some sort of source of information for when people wanted to hire a coach. They could go to a website and basically it would be a source of like verified coaches, a list of verified coaches. And we would look to have companies like JPS and other reputable coaches that have been in the industry for years and have spent thousands on education and years on education and things like that, with a very good track record to basically support this thing. And to be a verified coach on a list of something like this, you would have to show some evidence of education. And I'm not saying that people need fucking PhDs, but some sort of education, like maybe let's say like a minimum of 2 years where you can document that you've spent time generating knowledge or investing in yourself. So it could be like mentorships or certifications, things like that. Like that would be like a bare minimum. And then perhaps you would have to provide like some client references that the body could like fact check, to like you would be going for a job interview where people can like call these people up and say like, how was this guy as a coach? Like, what do you have to say about him? And then maybe even like some sort of like interview or exam where we like ask some questions to sort of like see, okay, how much does this person know? Do they show the bare minimum knowledge that we think would be enough to sort of verify them? And like there's a lot of holes in this idea that I'm just saying, but it's these sort of discussions need to happen somewhere. And over time, basically what would be fantastic is like if everyone in the industry could sort of get behind this, or at least the reputable people, and we could generate this massive list of like verified coaches. And if you're thinking about signing up with a coach, you go to this website and you say, okay, is he on the verified list? And if it got big enough, it could get to a point where it's like, you just wouldn't hire a coach if they hadn't been verified. They hadn't, and what we could have is like the coaches wanted to get on the list could send in like an application to get verified. And all of this stuff is going to cost money. But like me and Jacob said, people that are passionate about this stuff and are very passionate about the harm going on in the industry, we'd be fucking well happy to pay like an annual registration fee or something like that to sort of get some, to allow something like this to happen. Sam, as the businessman, has probably got 30 problems with this.
No. This is definitely like the whole idea of establishing a regulatory body is like, we actually spoke to a dude from the government a couple of years ago about potentially doing
to get a governing body. We tried to create our own governing body.
There's a lot of red tape, but like the main problem is that the bodies that already exist do not do what they should be doing. Like I would, like all these coaches that we're talking about with, throughout this call, where's the auditing? Like people, where is the accountability? Like not someone just sitting there being like, you have to pay your registration, right? All of it comes back to like being insured, right? Again, it's like to become a doctor and to practice, you have to have all of your degrees, you have to have done all your placement, like, you know, everything. You have to do it all, and then you'll be able to work and you'll be able to be insured. And that way, if you do make a mistake, because everyone makes mistakes, there's some, like, basically, you know, track record saying, yeah, this person knows what they're doing. So if they make a mistake, we're going to back them, right? Whereas, you know, if you personal trainers, it's so easy to get insurance. You just go and pay. They don't give a fuck. No one's really suing personal trainers. Not as many personal trainers are being sued as they probably should be. There's nowhere near enough auditing, right, within the industry.
Like it's going to be like fucking impossible to like prove malpractice in coaching, I think, because like, you get one coaching that's been fucked over, and like, oh, this guy did this and this and this. It's like, okay, like that's your word, like.
But it's a track record. Like the bad coaches show a history of it, right? It's like, yeah, maybe they have one person who gets really unwell, or maybe there's one person who speaks up, you know, and goes public about harassment, or maybe they were inappropriate with them. But if it comes out once, there's probably a pattern of it there somewhere, right?
What happens if we had like a website where it was like, it's like green ticks and like red flags, or some that's oversimplification.
Yeah,
but like if they had a complaint, they would get like a strike or something, like a WADA banned list, like drugs.
The only issue I see there is people
club
arguing that, well, who are you to say who's good and bad?
It's like, yeah, we're policing.
You need to establish an independent board of practitioners to vet the people within the industry. So you would have to have people who have the knowledge, have experience to basically, and have proven, you know, themselves within the industry in various domains, right?
Who's independent? Who's independent?
That's exactly right.
So my thoughts when I spoke to Danny a few weeks ago, I proposed that we have an independent international governing body, right? Where you have a board of, say, 10 individuals from different backgrounds. So you might have someone from nutrition, you might have someone from exercise science, psychology, and what they do is they create from their specific field, you know, best practice for fitness professionals, right? In terms of psychology, they establish scope of practice, as well as, you know, best available evidence for, you know, recommendations related to individuals within the scope of practice for personal trainers. This body then filters that information to each country, right? And has not only, you know, sort of like an information, you know, course, that an informative course that coaches would do to understand and learn all of this, but also like a coach development pathway for each country. And then from that, that's where where coaches who do that and who would be in that system and process would be verified, because they know best practice for each specific field, and they've shown. And then the auditing process would be a simple like examination where coaches have to, you know, answer questions to prove their knowledge, submit proof of ongoing education, as well as client case studies. And that's where auditing would be a simple matter of randomly selecting a number of people to follow up and fact check those case studies. That was essentially sort of my, I guess, ideas on that. So what do you think? What would you do if you were required to do something like this as an online coach? Would you be all about it, or would you have pushback?
No, I think definitely. I think at a bare minimum, people should be working on their education ongoing, like doing courses, going to seminars, whatever it might be. Because I think people get their Cert 3, 4, and then they think, you know, cool, that's done now. I don't need to really. People don't understand that there's ongoing research that comes out, and, you know, even those courses, Cert 3, 4, hopefully change what they're teaching. I think where it becomes really difficult is social media. Like, even for people who have these governing bodies, like doctors, like lawyers, obviously they have a code of ethics that they have to, you know, abide by, and it's really drilled into them in university. Like, I know psychologists have. My sister's a psych, and she was really funny about coming onto social media because of this code of ethics. So I feel like that's something that we don't have. And I just feel like social media makes this really difficult, because even someone who is a lawyer might come out there and be giving advice, or even someone who's not a lawyer might be giving out legal advice. So you're like, where do you draw this line, and how do you keep the masses accountable? and then getting the public on board, like having people having this out there. And I think that's probably up to the coaches who are verified or whatever to come out and say, like, this is something that is happening, and that's how we would get it out there.
I think the hard thing, like you said, would be like making something like this universal, and it's not going to happen like instantaneously. But ideally, it's like over time, more people would be getting on board, and then it's like, it's for some coach that's just come out of the woodwork somewhere. It's like for someone that's been at least, like, they're going to be seeing this body talked about somewhere if they're sort of in tap with social media, and that's the benefits of us being able to utilize social media at the moment. And I feel like a year deep or something like that, then people they just wouldn't be hiring out of the blue. Like, they wouldn't be hiring someone that has a six pack and thinking like, they know, like, that's the coach that I need. But maybe I'm just a little bit, I don't know, delusional. Maybe people don't really care about having that sort of regulation. It's like, just give me a nice transformation photo and like, I'm happy. Maybe that's what people think, but I would hope not. And I think that
people who
if
haven't
anyone's
had a bad experience would absolutely be chasing just the result, and they wouldn't care about much else. But I think any individual who has gone through that process, been burnt by a coach, or is feeling lost and confused after trying it all, which I think is definitely the majority of people seeking a coach, right? Like, coaches have been around a long time now. I think most people have had a chance to, work with a coach. So I do feel most people would be interested in finding someone who knows what they're doing, and can also look after them in the process.
I think consumers are becoming more savvy as well. Like, we're seeing this change on social media where there are certain coaches who are really calling people out and, putting out education in a way that the general population can understand. So they're becoming more savvy because they're consuming the content by these really well-educated people, and they're going, oh, hang on. Now they're starting to question a lot of the content that people who might have a big following and a good body but no qualifications are putting out. So I think that's a positive step in the right direction, but I think it's also making people really scared to actually create content because they're like, oh my God, do I actually know this? I'm going to get slammed. Whereas I feel like the people who question what they're putting out there more have that integrity, whereas people who don't give a shit are just putting stuff out, and it's doing harm. But I think consumers are now going, oh, this person said this, whereas this reputable person that I know to be right and highly educated said the opposite to this, so I'm actually going to not follow that person anymore. So I think that's one positive thing we're seeing in the social media landscape. But yeah, it has a long way to go, and something like a governing body would be really beneficial for people.
I think if anyone was going to push back, if me and Jacob came out and talked about this idea, if we got any pushback, it's going to be from coaches that are scared by this idea. It's like when we start talking about like exams to test knowledge, they'll be like, oh fuck, like this is going to be a problem. Like, legit coaches, they'll have no problem with this whatsoever. Like, give me the exam, no worries. It's like a very like easy way to work out if like a coach with a big influence is any good is like, would they happily like go and jump on a podcast and do like a Q&A or something like publicly? It's like, you give it to Jacob, like anyone in the world, like he come on a podcast and chat for an hour. Jacob's like, no worries. Like, and like, that's literally, he's open up to take anything like from anywhere. He'd happily answer it. It's like, but other coaches, like there's not a chance in hell that say yes to that. Or it's like, oh, give me all the questions first and I'll like do my 4 hours, like writing out my answers to each question first. So, I'd love to see what the response would be to putting out something like this, because the reputable, legitimate guys, they will be supportive of this. But the ones that are not, like this would scare the hell out of them, I think.
I agree. I agree.
really rattle some cages.
It'll ruffle some jimmies for sure. Well, guys,
Start posting the exam results on the website.
yeah, they would. There'd be a whole
Do not hire
there'd be a
this
whole
person.
there'd be a whole Reddit forum with people just like leaking the answers. Then we have a whole new set of problems to deal with. But anyway, guys, it's been great talking to you. I think this might need a part 2, if I'm honest, because there's plenty to unpack here. Sophie, thank you so much for joining us, guys. I hope you enjoyed that. Where can everyone find you, Soph?
Instagram, Sophie Allen, SOPHEALLEN. Same on TikTok. Pretty much same everywhere. Train with Soph, Instagram, website.
Awesome. Well, guys, hope you enjoyed that. Be sure to tune in for the next episode, and we'll speak to you all soon.